Heather Heward here from University of Idaho. This video is going to be a brief demonstration of how to use the Interagency Fuels Treatment Decision Support System, or IFTDSS, to do some basic landscape summary information and run a little bit of fire behavior and do some comparisons. So the IFTDSS program has an enormous amount of wonderful help resources and videos. This one's just concentrated for what I'm hoping to use it for. So to begin, I've already created a login, so you'll need to request a login. And now that I'm in the system, I'm going to just start out with my Map Studio. I'm interested in running fire behavior for the Moscow Mountain area. I'm hoping to get an assessment of the major risk factors or risk areas that are in this region, and I can start to make some decisions about potential field treatment areas, and also just inform the managers in the area what areas might be highest risk. So once I'm zoomed into my general area, I'm going to go click on this Landscape Tools. And here are all the landscapes that I've already downloaded. I'm going to create a new one and draw a box. So this area creates a buffer, and that buffer is in place for the additional functionality tool of burn probability, so it adds that buffer for you. And I'm interested in the 2016 data. And I'm interested in the 45 here for fuel models, and then I'm going to name this something that is meaningful. I found that for too long I just named things that didn't make any sense to me, and they just became wasted. So let's try and have good naming conventions here. So that's gotten named, and I'm going to click Create. And I saved that into my playground. So I'm going to go to the playground, and this is just where things will default to when you're creating them. Actually, here it is in my workspace, and see how it's building there. So this is all the different files that I've got. I have different content folders here, so I could have increased the level of organization by adding it to my Moscow Mountain folder, but that's all right for now. And what I'll do is just refresh. All right, that took about 10 minutes to complete. I just refreshed the page and saw that it had completed. So notice that this is in my all content folder, and then I've got my playground folder over here, which is where it currently is. And as I scroll across things, I see all of this help information. Super, super helpful. And I can always click to learn more, and it brings me to a page that has all kinds of good content. So far, I haven't found a question that I have not been able to get answered with the help content. So now I'm going to go to this landscape, and I'm going to request a report. Actually, for now, I might just view on map for fun. Let's do that. So there's my landscape. And I have several different layers. All of these layers are what's needed to form a landscape scale file, or LCP file, that's needed for fire modeling. And got all kinds of information here. If I wanted to, I could add a layer that would give some reference to where my project is. The layer that I add would need to be a zipped file. So unlike other files that might be accessed by something like ARC, which only needs unzipped files, you're actually looking for a zipped file in this case. And here I have already uploaded my experimental forest boundary. So now I can see where the boundary of the experimental forest is in reference to my whole project area. So let's go back to my workspace, and I would like to request a report. And this would allow me to request a report only for the experimental forest boundary if I wanted one. This would be an important piece if you have done a treatment and you want to just see the changes inside that treatment polygon and not the whole surrounding area. But for now, I'm actually going to use this information for an assessment of the overall effectiveness or accuracy of the land fire data for my area, so I want to see everything. So I'm just going to leave that blank and click Create Report. And this will take a little bit to generate as well. All right, so I've closed that out, and now I see that here's the landscape that I had first requested, and here's the report completed, and I'm going to view this summary. So I really like the way that these summary reports look in IFTDSS. They're very sharp. So if I wanted to include this in a report of some kind, what I might do is change the size of my screen, which would adjust how this table displays. And so let's say I wanted to present this information to a manager in this area and say, do these field models represent what you feel like you have in your area? So let's just do that as an example on what that would look like in adding this to a report. So let's adjust this to be pretty narrow. On a page in a Word document, let's say we want to have two figures next to each other or two graphs next to each other. So I'm just going to fast forward here a little bit. I'm going to clip each of these tables and I'll put them into a Word document. I'll show you how you can create a figure that with these combined. All right, so I have snipped the tables that I'm interested in out, and I'm just going to show you a little bit of word magic here so that we can have these tables do what we want them to in a report that we might create. So I'm going to make each of these wrapped tightly. What that allows me to do is move them side by side. And I can change their size a little bit as I need to. And notice that I haven't included the information in the IFTDSS header here. That's because each of them has the same information, and information that I can include just once in the figure caption. So I will move these around the way I want them. And the application here is, if I want to have a manager who's more familiar with this area than I am, look at these data and determine whether the landfire data is representing my area or this area appropriately. And if it's not, then I can do some adjustments to the data. And if it is, then they'll have more confidence when they use the product. So now I have these four things. They've got their labels on them, so they'll know what's which figures for what. Then I can highlight each one, and I'm going to right click and select group. So then these all become just one figure and they can move all together. And now what I'll do is right click and I can say insert caption. And what this does is it just makes another text box below it. But what I can say here is the detail that's included in this IFTDSS page, which is that it's from Landfire 2016 and that it's for a total of about 300,000 acres. We'll say that. Acres. All that information is really important for the manager to be able to interpret this information. So if I really wanted to make this easy for them to interpret, I would include an additional piece, which is about these fire behavior fuel models. So I would go to this comparemodelsfour spreadsheet, which is available from Pyrologic's website. It's also available on sparkedresources.weebly.com. And you can probably just Google comparemodelsfour spreadsheet. There's the title up there. What the intent here is that if I'm delivering this to a manager, then maybe they aren't familiar with the application of the fire behavior fuel models, but they might be familiar with the fire behavior in their area. So the most prominent fire behavior fuel models in my area appear to be GR2, GS2, and TU5 and TL8. And so what I'm going to do here is graph those figures. GR2 and GS2, we'll start with those. GR2 and GS2. And TU5 is probably going to fit well within that as well. TL8, let's see if TL8 shows up. Sometimes these higher fire behavior fuel models will drown out the smaller fire behavior fuel models. That seemed to work out okay. So what we've got now is for very dry conditions at a 3, 4, 5 for our dead field moisture content, these are the expected rates of spread. So I'm going to take a screen capture of this and include it in my report so that as I deliver this to the manager, they can see what fuel models exist there and what at least their general fire behavior is expected to be. And if they look at that and they say, you know what, that's not what our fire behavior would be like, and then we might need to know that we would need to make some adjustments to the fuel models that are there. And this would be, notice how it does figure caption too. Isn't that amazing? And I would maybe provide some more detail in there, which fuel models they are, and just specify which weather information it was. I also would say that this is actually not just fire behavior, this is rate of spread. Okay. I'll go back to my comparemodelsfour spreadsheet, and I will change this to flame length and do the same thing. So now with this information, the manager can make a decision about how accurate they feel the land fire data represents their area. We'll leave that for later. So now back to IFTDSS. So that's the way that we get a report of what's in our area. But what if we want to look now at fire behavior and see how fire behavior is doing across a landscape? The previous step and this step are all are pieces of the evaluation process for land fire data, and it helps you more accurately or more confidently use the land fire data and make adjustments as you need. So let's do some fire behavior assessment now across the landscape. So we'll go back up. First we'll close out of this report. The reports themselves, of course, you can just export those reports, but I liked just pieces of the report for what I was hoping to use it for. So I'm going to go to this cycle, and I'm going to create model fire behavior. And I'm going to select landscape fire behavior and create a run. So the landscape that I want to use is the one that I've just been working with, the Demo 2020. I also, at this point, could create a new landscape there. And here's where I would pull in information from another program like Fire Family Plus. So if I was looking to run fire behavior under different percentile weather conditions, for example, 97th percentile weather conditions or 90th percentile weather conditions, or even the weather conditions that were present on a day of large fire growth, then I would get that information from a program called Fire Family Plus. And you can find some resources on how to use Fire Family Plus on sparkedresources.weebly.com. For now, I'm going to use some general information that I know to be somewhat accurate for my area. So the wind speeds, we'll just say the wind speeds for now are 5 miles an hour. Wind direction, we'll say they're 300 degrees. I can also, so that's generate gridded winds using Wind Ninja. And I'm going to use the Scott and Reinhardt crime fire calculation method, which has shown to be best fit for the land fire data. And I'll keep my foliar moisture content at 100 for now. And my initial fuel moistures, right now the default one, so there's no default one. So we'll just go with a pattern which is similar to what we had in the comparemodelsfour spreadsheet with a 3, 4, and 5. And our herbaceous moistures, will stick with those at 100. And if you were to really do some playing around here and just change one variable at a time, or use a program called Behave to manipulate each of those variables individually, and then you'll be able to see which one of those holds a little bit more power that you could use that actually affect your fire behavior. And the name of my run is going to be Demo, and we'll call it 3, 4, 5. That'll help me know which fuel moistures, and then I'll say wind of 5. And select run. So then I've got in my playground, which is where my model results are, this is where my outputs will end up. And so it's just going to be processing for now. All right, so that took about 10 or 15 minutes to complete the run. And I'm going to view on map again. So there's my fire behavior, flame length, rate of spread, fire land intensity, crown fire activity. So under those weather variables, we had pretty minimal crown fire activity. So let's go back to my playground, and actually I'm going to go to my workspace. So here's our model output, and I'm going to request a report here. Again, I could request a report for a specific area. Let's just try that. So if I just wanted a report for the University of Idaho external forest boundary, I could create this report. And it would only pull the information directly for that polygon. So now I can see the report of the fire behavior across the landscape. Oh, no, this isn't across the landscape. This is just for the external forest boundary. So I can see my flame length across this boundary. That's pretty nice. If I'm most familiar with a specific area, it'll just run that for that specific spot. So back to the model demo. I'm going to request another report, but this time for the whole area. And back in the playground, I made a new run for winds with 20 miles per hour, winds of 20 miles per hour with the same 1, 10, and 100 hour fill moistures. And that's going to serve me to do a comparison between a 5 mile an hour wind and a 20 mile an hour wind. All right, so now that I have both of my model runs complete with 5 mile an hour winds and 10 mile an hour, 20 mile an hour winds, I'd like to compare them. Right now in IFTDSS, the capability that's there is to compare two different landscapes with the same weather conditions, but I'm interested in comparing two different weather conditions on the same landscape. And so at this time, the way that we need to approach that is by viewing the summary reports and actually entering that information into Excel. And so I'll just show you how to do that to create a nice summary report so that you can show a land manager how fire behavior would change across a landscape with one set of weather conditions and another set of weather conditions. So what I might do first here is take some screen captures. So again, this is a really nice page. It's got a lot of the input weather variables, and so you'd want to make sure that you kept a lot of this information. So if I were to do some screen capturing here, it would include the legend and information, map information. So through using the snipping tool, I was able to create just some screen captures of the 5 mile an hour wind conditions and the 20 mile an hour wind conditions, but as you can see, it's hard to really see a good comparison. So the variables that I'm interested in for my comparison are flame length, spread rate or rate of spread, and crown fire activity. So I know that there's been a big difference in the fire behavior. I'd like to see this in a graph format. So let's go through the process of making that in Excel. So the fastest way to get this into Excel is to go back to IFTDSS, and I've already created an Excel document, saved it at their proper location, named it appropriately. And on IFTDSS, I'm just going to select copy here, and it's copied these 7 rows into a clipboard. And then I'll go to IFTDSS and paste those in. And all I'm looking for here is the acres. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete these 2. Well, actually for now I'll leave them because I'll delete them all at the same time. So then back to IFTDSS, and I'll do the same thing for rate of spread. And crown fire activity. All right, so now I'm going to make some room and make some labels. So delete these 2 columns that I don't need and insert a column here. Actually, I'm not going to insert a column. I'm going to call this acres in LCP. We'll actually just call this, yeah, we'll say 20 miles per hour. It's important to make sure that we keep these labeled, otherwise we'll get them mixed up. 20 miles per hour. And what we'll also need to include after we've created this are the input variables in our figure caption. All right. So now I'll go through, pause for a moment, I'll go through and copy the other variables from the 5 mile an hour wind scenario. All right, just copying the final one here, where paste it in, and then I'm moving my column that I want over to its spot. And you can see these numbers have changed quite a lot, which is what we expect with an increase in winds. And just make sure that my labels are correct. $5 miles per hour. And what I think I might do is just indicate that the acres are up here. And then we'll have 20 mile per hour, 5 mile per hour. And then I can have these labels be used in the table itself. All right. So now what I can do is create some bar graphs. So I'm going to highlight my information and go to Insert and Bar Graph. So pretty slick. It just knows what I'm looking for here, and I can make some changes. So first I want to make sure I'm labeling things. This is the flame length. And I want to make sure that my colors represent what I feel would be intuitive. And so the color here for the 5 mile an hour winds might be more of a yellow, and the 20 mile an hour winds might be more of a darker red. So you can mess around with your own colors, whatever you like. So the other thing that I might want to do is switch the order of them so that the 5 mile an hour is first, and then 20 is next to that. So now I've got my nice figure, and this can really give some good information about how fire behavior changes with an increase in wind. So then this can, of course, just be inserted into my whatever report that I want, and I can do that same combination for these other figures. I might switch these around just to see how much of a difference that makes in visual awareness of it. Highlight all these options, insert. Yeah, I'm going to like that better. All right, so now I've got some figures that can accompany these images that I have in my report. And then if I were to present this to a manager, what I can show them is that there's a distinct difference in fire behavior across the landscape under different weather variables. And if you go through and you change this information you change your fuel models or whatever, you can compare the fire behavior across different fuel treatments, which is even more powerful. So the last thing I wanted to show you quickly in IFTDSS is how to export the landscape layers and the fire behavior layers so that you can use them in other programs like ARC and FlamMap. So as you probably noticed, the comparison of the different maps is a little bit clunky right now if you wanted to do that comparison in IFTDSS, but you could do it really pretty smoothly in programs like ARC. But how do you get it in there? So what you do is you would go to your reports, and not your reports, your model output, and you click download, and it downloads as a zip file. And in this zip file includes a geotiff, which you could use in ARC, and it also includes an inputs file, which you can use in FlamMap. So IFTDSS is a very convenient way to do manipulations of the landscape. We haven't covered that here, but if you want to avoid using that in other programs, then you can do all that manipulation in IFTDSS, and then you can export those layers that you've created. And here's what you end up with: an input file for FlamMap, a TIFF for ARC, and you can import that information there and use other programs to maximize the utility of this feature. All right, that's all for today. Thanks.